Hello again. Here we are at another Mark the Text video. I'm Dan, and as always, I want to draw your attention to AFES, the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students. Every December, they run the national training event, and in Strand 1, you learn how to read a text of the Bible well. There's a lot of stuff that you learn in that strand. One of the things is what we've got here. It's a kind of toolbox of different things to note when you're reading a text of the Bible, studying a text. And this is what these videos are all about, marking up our text so that you can read and see what's going on there better. There's a whole lot of different tools of the trade there that they have. Today we're going to focus on two. We're going to notice on words that are repeated, repetition, the same word, sometimes the same word, sometimes not the same word, but it's a similar idea that's repeated again and again. And we're going to notice as well in the passage today, which is Daniel 5, some literary highlighting, particularly with contrasts and comparisons. And what we're going to notice, I've read the passage already and spent not a lot of time with it, but a little bit of time with it to make this video worth your while. We're going to see that on the one hand, there are issues of power or ability. And then there are also the opposite, issues of being powerless or having inability. And to kind of mark those out in the text, I'm going to use a green colour to talk about power and ability, and we're going to have a red colour to notice powerless or inability. So let's head over to Daniel chapter 5. I've got the text here for us, and we're just going to read through and keep our eyes looking out for these things: power and ability, powerless and inability. Daniel chapter 5. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in, he's giving orders. There's a bit of power there. Gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wife and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, of iron, wood and stone. We're going to come back to that in a minute. While this is happening, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. I wonder why he reacted that way. Has he just come in contact with someone who has more power, perhaps? Let's see. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. And then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he'll be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." And then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. They don't have the ability. They don't have the power. And so King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale." Listen to this. "There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. This man has power. This man has ability. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, the enchanters, the astrologers, and the diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. Here is a man with power, with ability. He can explain what the writing on the wall means." So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father, the king, brought from Judah? I have heard that the Spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and the enchanters were brought before me to explain this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. They did not have the ability. Now, I've heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read, right? The king's not convinced yet he's got the ability. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you'll be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you'll be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. And then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar. Now, this is interesting. Nebuchadnezzar has sovereignty. He's got power. But the Most High God gave that power, didn't he? So there's degrees of power and ability. Nebuchadnezzar has sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor, but it came from God Most High. Because of the high position he gave to him, listen to this for power, all the nations and people of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Right? Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. Those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But he's got this power. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed. Right? His kingship, his sovereignty was taken away. He was deposed. Someone else has greater power. He was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from his people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged. What did he have to acknowledge? Until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all the kingdoms of the earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. Isn't that interesting? He is the ultimate power. Most High God is sovereign. That's the same word. Nebuchadnezzar has sovereignty, but here is the ultimate sovereignty, isn't it? It's come from God. Same thing we saw here. Most High God gave the sovereignty, and this is ultimate sovereignty. The whole kingdoms of the earth, and he sets over them anyone he wishes. Anyone he wishes at all. But you, okay, another contrast now. That's what happened to his father or his predecessor. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled himself, though you knew all of this. Instead, you've set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. That does not sound good. If the Lord of heaven has ultimate authority and power, you set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, the wives and their concubines, drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, of iron, wood, and stone. Listen to this. You praise these gods, which cannot see or hear or understand. They are powerless. They don't have ability. That's what we said we'd come back to. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. But what we find now, they cannot see or hear or understand. They don't have power. They don't have ability. Only God, the true God, the Most High God, has those things. These gods are just like the wise men. They could not tell the king what it meant. They could not explain it. And so these gods cannot hear or see or understand. They have no power. They have no ability. And you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Oh dear. Here is power. He holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And here is the words and what they mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. That's power. You've been weighed on the scales and found wanting. God has power over this man's life. Your kingdom is divided and given to others. That's power. Belshazzar, he's good to his word. Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he's proclaimed third highest ruler in the kingdom. But it doesn't matter, because that very night Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede takes over. It's interesting to me that in this final verse, God doesn't even have to be mentioned, right? These two verses. It doesn't have to say God was the one who made Belshazzar slain. No, because it's clear from all the context that's come already. That very night shows us that this is not idle words. These are not words without power, because that very night it happens, what God predicted through the writing on the wall. And so there are other things going on in this passage. But when you zoom out and have a look at the chapter as a whole, look how much of the chapter we've highlighted as having these themes of either power and ability, or a lack of power, a powerlessness and an inability. There are other things going on there and other things we could highlight, but for the purpose of this video, it's enough. We've seen certain ideas being repeated. In this passage, it was not the same word. It's not as though we saw power, 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 powerlessness, powerlessness, but it was the same idea in a whole range of words. We kept seeing power and ability, or a powerlessness and an inability. And that's one of the keys to this passage that helped us to slow down and read this passage a bit more clearly, to see that this is a key theme going on in Daniel chapter 5. Where does true power lie? Who really has the ability? In this chapter, it's only God and Daniel, his prophet. And if you'd read all the way through Daniel, you'll know that Daniel he doesn't say, I'm powerful. He gives the glory back to God and says, the only abilities that I have come from God. So ultimately, God is the only one who has power in this chapter. And Belshazzar, his wise men, the gods he follows, they're all powerless. If that's the case, how should someone align themselves? How should they relate to the true God that has all power? Belshazzar aligns himself in one way, doesn't he? He takes God's goblets from the temple and drinks from them while praising powerless gods. And we see what comes to him because of the way he related to this God who has all the power in the universe. It begs the question, how are you aligning yourself and relating yourself to that God? Hope it's been helpful. There's just some things that I thought stood out to me, and I find it really helpful because I'm a visual person, to mark the text and slow down and read. And so I hope you join in again. Click a like, click a subscribe. Join us again as we look at the next part of Daniel and we mark the text again.